Livestream. I am Andi Kinsey. I'm your host and the creator of Kicking the Bucket. This series is a fiction podcast. So, fiction means that it's a scripted story. It's not true, although it's loosely inspired by my own personal experience and friends' experiences as well. It is a dramedy. So that means that you're going to laugh and you're going to cry, and it's immersive, which means that it's kind of like a TV series for your ears. The show premiered yesterday and we are very excited. So our first episode is out. Visit our website. The link is below at the bottom of the screen. That is the hub of all things Kicking the Bucket. You can find a link to the show, our newsletter, socials, replays of these live streams. I'm supposed to say that the live streams drop every Wednesday. So we have a couple of viewers who are already coming on. So hello, welcome, welcome. Our live streams drop every Wednesday. So what is the point of these live streams? They are like bonus content for the show. And today I'm very excited to welcome Michelle McCarty and Melissa Saffron. They are both occupational therapists and end-of-life doulas with Solace and Sage. And they are here for a two-part series. We were very, very lucky to have them last night at our premiere listening club, and we're here to continue the conversation today. So welcome, Michelle, and welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Absolutely.
Yay. Okay, so I am going to start us off with some questions. If you all who are watching have any questions, please throw them in the chat and we will get to them as soon as we can. So let's start off with you two telling us a little bit about yourselves and your practice. Melissa, you want to start, and then Michelle add on?
Great, yes. So Michelle and I are both occupational therapy practitioners and end-of-life doulas. And we co-founded the nonprofit Solace and Sage, where we help adults 60 years and older manage and navigate those challenges associated with aging in place and remaining at home throughout the lifespan. We take a unique approach. We take a three-pronged approach. We focus on their personal needs, your medical needs, and your environmental needs. What really led us to this was we saw working in the skilled nursing settings and helping adults, return home and navigate that discharge process. And we just really saw that it was really important that not only were their medical needs being addressed, but that their environments were matching those needs so that they could, successfully return home. We noticed that, regardless of the similarities between, the medical challenges that they were facing, that there were these vast discrepancies between how people were responding to these challenges. And not everybody was able to, have that sense of preserving their quality of life throughout that process, and they really struggled. We were really focusing through our training to focus on, helping them physically adapt. If there was anything they needed to compensate for as therapists, we help you physically adapt. We teach you how to use adaptive equipment. But there were some that were just really not carrying out those strategies. Why were some successfully adapting and there are others that were not? And that kind of led us on that journey to looking further into that. And that led us to the Reinventing Independence model where, we realized that it's all about making sure that they're personally, they're mentally, emotionally, and physically adapting. And we see that that's really important throughout any medical event and all the way throughout the lifespan, at end of life as well.
Excellent. And Michelle, you want to jump in?
Well, and I think that's why this project was just so important to us and participating with Kicking the Bucket, because we see so many people that are struggling and trying to, manage and navigate that end of life journey. And, you're doing it with your tribe and, the people that are around you and supporting you. And when you don't know what options are available, you don't know what's out there, it's very scary. You're trying to address the medical change and a life-limiting diagnosis. You're trying to address all of your family members and the dynamic, as well as where am I going to go? And that is the environment. It just, this, it helps to really focus on having an approach that gives everybody some solid footing to move forward with decisions that are in alignment with what's meaningful, value, and purposeful for them. And everybody is coming from a different perspective, and they mean well and they have good intentions. And so we just see a real need to apply what we do to this end of life journey and supporting people. So that's kind of why we're here, and we're planning on being there every week to help support conversations and just be present as everybody experiences this, this amazing podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Every week at the listening clubs. I don't know. It's kind of like you're giving some solace and sage, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Their link is also at the bottom of the screen right now. So for those of you who are just joining us, we did have this we started this conversation yesterday at the live stream, the listening club. There is a live stream recording of it that you can go back and watch to hear that conversation. So we're going to kind of continue what we were touching on yesterday. We were kind of going through the first episode, episode 1, bit by bit. And we were discovering that this live stream is kind of like the guide to death and dying that Dolores and Howard should have had.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we left off, we were talking, where maybe we should recap really quickly. At the beginning, we were talking about how just the experience as you're aging, the feeling of being all of a sudden confronting this nursing home or the retirement community, this new phase of your life and the feelings you might go through. We also didn't know all of the options at this point. So can we just recap again, what are the options when you get older? You may not be able to be as physically robust in your space. You, of course, help people age in space. What are the other options, or age at home? What are the other options out there as you get older?
Go ahead, Michelle. You can talk
I'll
about
jump in.
Yeah.
I'll jump in.
You did a great job last night, so I was going to say, go ahead.
There are a myriad of options. And I think that's, that is the theme for this podcast, and making sure that people understand, even when you don't know what the options are, there are resources out there. There's organizations that will sit with you and explain options, and we can certainly direct you to any of those specific resources if anyone has a need. But in the community, there's a range of independent living to assisted living to long-term care. Memory care is for people that have cognitive disabilities, and they are incorporated into long-term care as well as assisted living. There are different home settings, group home type settings for people. And the life plan communities that can facilitate a range, so you can stay in one campus, and progress. And there's many services that can be provided in home to support your personal and medical needs and environmental needs. And that's what our focus is, just so that we can avoid people having to be removed, from their home. But I think it starts with you trying to figure out what's important, and aside from the medical diagnosis, so that you can start with a plan and get your feet in a solid place that establishes what's meaningful to you, then you can go forward to determine where that's going to happen and how that's going to happen.
Right. And to add to that, when Michelle's referring to a plan, we're referring to what are your priorities, what are your limitations, what are your abilities, and what are your needs. And what's nice about all these different facilities is, like in assisted living, for example, based on those priorities, limitations, abilities, and needs, you can have tiers of services. You may not need all these services at once. You may be moving into an assisted living simply because, you're having difficulty managing your meds. So you would pay for that extra layer of support for managing your meds. But it can keep going all the way up to your meals, to someone assisting with showering, a variety of things. So it's just, definitely is catered to your specific needs as you progress, and needing more and more support.
Mm-hmm. So yesterday we were talking about how Dolores and Howard really didn't even know what their options were, and that is part of the reason why they perhaps chose to go the route that they did, or they're choosing to go the route that they did. So we left off after Howard had received his diagnosis, and they both heard the diagnosis, and they were leaving the doctor's office. So what did you want to touch upon about what happened next in that episode?
So as we mentioned, it's really important to look at this as a three-pronged approach, that you have your personal needs, you have your medical needs, and you have your environmental needs. And in that appointment, the physician's automatically jumping into addressing your medical needs. That's what they're there for. And their solution, and options may not necessarily perfectly fit, like what Howard wanted to do. And so when we talk about those personal needs, we're really talking about, that sense of control, that sense of well-being, and that sense of competence. And Howard jumping into not wanting to take any options on the table. He already was jumping into, he was going to take his life into his own hands. Again, jumping into action before you've mentally and emotionally got on board really is not the best approach. We want you to have your decisions be in alignment with what's meaningful, valuable, and purposeful to you. And that does require exploring many options. And so that fear of losing his sense of control, Howard jumped into action. That was his way of taking control. But then as they further discuss, they don't feel very confident about this decision. They don't have any information to be able to manage and navigate this decision. And that's that piece, about making sure that you put all these options on the table and not just jump into getting that sense of control without really exploring, a variety of options. And this was the only option that Howard thought he had to maintain that sense of control. It was all about control for him, as it is for everyone. When we lose our sense of control, when we lose that sense of well-being, where we're not satisfied with the decisions we're making or satisfied with our circumstances, that also impacts the competence we have. And Michelle and I, view quality of life as being able to preserve those three things. If you can preserve your sense of control, if you can preserve that sense of well-being, and you can preserve your sense of competence and confidence, you are preserving your quality of life. And so, that's what we could see clearly, that Howard was really wanting, trying to preserve and jumping into that decision.
In some ways, it's like, I think that's one of those myths, right, that we all don't understand, because it feels like everything's telling us, the world tells us, as soon as you get older, you don't have as much control, you're losing your physical ability, you're losing your mental ability. So it's this fear of the unknown that in some ways, I think, is preventing us from even going out. I'm saying us, like I'm speaking for the world, but preventing people from going out to try to find new information, because we think we know. We think we know that it's not good, right? So, so I imagine that this would be better if you were addressing this earlier rather than when you get into that situation, which is part of the panic that happens, and perhaps the abrupt reaction. So what are some things that people, like if Howard and Dolores had thought about this in advance, what are some of the things they could have done in advance so that they would not be in this position today?
Sure. Michelle talked about it last night. The advanced directives are a huge piece in that.
Well, and I think, identifying what is important to you and where do you see yourself on your end of life journey. Dolores knows, she's witnessed her mother and her grandmother through their advanced stages of Alzheimer's, and that level of support and where they were was not something that she was interested in. She talks about, I lost my parents and my grandparents, and then that progressive disease. And so I think then the next thing would be, then what would you envision? What would you envision as far as your level of care and where you want to be? And specific to a dementia diagnosis, you can put advanced directives in place that identify the early stages, the middle stages, and the late stages. And early being, where Dolores is, and she has mild cognitive. If something was to happen, you would want her to go to the hospital and be treated, and she can still make decisions and participate. But as that disease progresses and she doesn't recognize anyone around her, and she's maybe had to have her diet modified, and if she has a case of pneumonia that would require IV antibiotics and hospitalizations, but we know taking her to the hospital would create so much trauma for her because she's confused and she wouldn't understand, and she would have to be in restraints. And then we know if she was there, that her dementia would progress faster. And so, there's things we know about putting strenuous situations, with people that have advanced cognitive impairments. And so she could have decided early on that, what, if these are my characteristics, I do not want that. I don't want to go to the hospital. Please make me comfortable and, create an atmosphere where I can just continue on my end of life journey and have quality throughout the end. But when you don't make those decisions prior, then your adult children or whoever is responsible for making those, they're just at a loss and they don't know what to do. And it feels like they're giving up on them, or they're maybe harming them. And we've witnessed in, skilled nursing and then long-term care where, the adult children are so confused and they feel so bad and they don't want their mom to go and have to be in restraints. But they also don't want to just feel like they're literally giving up on her and letting her die and preventing her from living.
And you had mentioned that uncertainty. That is what the fear is. Change is tough, but change is tough because of all the uncertainty. And she knew she had no control. We don't have control of the progression of an illness, but we do have control how we respond to that. And that's like what Michelle's saying, doing those advanced directives, having specific clauses, that is where we have our control, and that's so important. And even myself, I have a clause in there saying, like Michelle was saying, if I don't recognize my loved ones, that's my quality of life. So if I'm not recognizing my loved ones, I don't want these measures. I don't want you to put me on an antibiotic every time I get sick, or I don't want you to put a feeding tube in me if I'm not able to, swallow or chew. It's just, I don't want you to take these measures to prolong me here and give all these medical procedures to me that we've somehow normalized and somehow think that's a natural progression as we age, or even as we're actively dying. We've made them natural, but they're really interventions. And so ultimately you can have these clauses in your advanced directive to decide what interventions do you actually want, and when do you want to let nature take its course and naturally support the dying process, but in the most beautiful way that you can. We can control and make our wishes known to be able to influence and have a beautiful, experience. Death doesn't have to be, this terrifying, horrifying experience. And that's end of life doulas. I don't know if you heard of birthing doulas, but they're there to make an experience that some people can think is absolutely traumatizing and terrifying, but you can actually take control and create a beautiful experience. And dying is just as natural as being born. And so we can have that great experience.
It's true. A natural part of life. So those who are just joining us, we're here talking with Michelle and Melissa from Solace and Sage. We have a couple of, live streams with them. We have part 2 next week, and you can see the conversation we had with them last night also on our live streams. So can we touch a little bit upon this, the advanced directives? Like Melissa, you said, I don't want, and I too, like once I don't recognize my family and my loved ones anymore, that's when I'm like, what's the point of being around? But I know when I've been talking with my family, I comment about how that's a burden on them and I don't want to be a burden. And one of the responses I got from my family was, well, but you're deciding for well, like our daughter and son, for instance. So you're deciding for them, like what is a burden. So how do you balance what the person wants with also including what the survivors or the people who are left behind, what they want? Because you want to err, of course, on the side of the person, but then you also want to include the other people in that conversation. So how do you balance that? Oops, sorry.
I think, one of the things that's most impactful when I have been working on advanced directives or having conversations with my own children and my spouse is to let them also participate in creating their own. Because I have an adult child, and so when everyone's thinking about how can I maintain quality of life all the way to the end, you start realizing that is my life, and that's how I can maintain the sense of control. And you know, I flip it also on the people in the room and say, well, what do you think? I mean, if you had a car accident and were incapacitated and needed to be on a feeding tube and a ventilator, is that something that you would want? Because it's not necessarily about a burden.
Right.
It's about a sense of control. And so I try to remove that word because I want everybody to have a perspective and their own frame of reference on this is what's important to me, and this would be my priority for what I want life to look like. If I don't want to be in a nursing home at 25 and on a ventilator and not able to communicate with other people, my mom probably wouldn't want to be on a ventilator or in a nursing home at an advanced state of dementia, not able to communicate. So I think it kind of gives a little perspective, and that adapting your frame of reference is that first step, and really being able to restore a sense of control.
Right. Absolutely. To add to that, when you were saying burden, I think, if we were to really talk about it and kind of get further into that discussion, like Michelle said, and it's about the frame of reference, I think you're really meaning that that's not quality of life to me. So that decision still is for you. We're not really making that decision for the other person, because then that person feels responsible. And it's like, oh, you're worried about me, so that's why you're doing it. When really, if you peel the layers back, that's not a quality of life for you. And that's why you would make that decision. Mm-hmm. And it happens to also be, you don't have, they don't have to go through that. But the real priority is the fact that it's not a quality of life for you. And that is the whole point of the advanced directives, is that, nobody has to be doubting. Nobody has to be, wondering, did I do the right thing? And we don't have to give uncertainty to our loved ones, because we know, what uncertainty feels like. It definitely impacts, their quality of life. And so we want to remove that uncertainty and have them be completely certain about what we want in the event that we can't tell them what we want. So that's the real role of that, and helping. And it helps you have those conversations, like Michelle said, when everyone's thinking about what their own best wishes are, they would better relate to and support what you want as well.
When do you include, because you hear stuff and you automatically just look at it from your perspective. So what if the caregiver cannot provide, like the person says, this is my quality of life, and this is what I need in order to want to be around. What if the caregiver cannot provide that for them, whether it's, money, ability, times, whatever? How does that come into play? Because then you're like, I know that's, you still would want to be here if you could get this, but I can't provide this for you. So, do I need to give a specific example? Is that a clear question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's important for you to figure out, why you want the things that you want. I mean, like, why it is important to you. Why do I want to have, X, Y, and Z as far as what in my ideal end of life journey would look like. And then, what would that look like, and to be able to define that. And then there's the how is that going to happen? And so, if it is a loved one that intends on being your caregiver, maybe they can't provide all the pieces of the how, and that's okay. Everybody's going to come to this circumstances, these situations with their own priorities, limitations, and abilities and needs. And so we help both parties identify their plan, because this person maybe want to be a caregiver because I'm the daughter, and I want to be involved and do all of these things, but I also live over here, and this list of limitations. I might have a list of abilities, but I also have limitations. And I think what you're saying is sometimes it's just not realistic, and it's not a good fit. And when it's not a good fit and you try to do it, that's where it's not sustainable, and that's where we have caregiver burnout, and there's a lot of stress. And so we do a lot of consulting with individuals and their loved ones because they're at a place where they just can't maintain what they're doing because it wasn't sustainable to begin with. And everybody has great intentions, just like the conversations last night, but it's the how is that going to happen that we have to sit down and honor both parties' desire and their priorities, but it's the how, and that's where we look at that person in medical and environmental approach.
And that's where that third piece of the puzzle comes in, where it's that wide scope of support.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying, what if I can't do it all? And we look at it as the word scope, and S stands for systems. We can help, and there's a lot of community resources to put systems in place, to fill in the gaps where the loved one or the caregiver can't do or be there for. Someone can be there to get mom up in the morning because you have to head off to work. Someone can be there to do bathing at night. And there's systems you can be putting in place for that extra support. It's really important to have the coping strategies. You want to make sure as a caregiver that you have coping strategies in place so that you are feeling balanced and that your quality of life is being maintained, and that you don't have burnout. And so it's really important to know, and we work with you, to help you identify what are those coping strategies. Then it's for occupational adjustments. Everybody is engaging in all kinds of different occupations, but with all these changes, we want to make sure that we're helping you make those adjustments so that you're able to successfully carry out those occupations. Then it's the P for personally advocating. We want to help you learn how to personally advocate, know what's out there, be able to express what your needs are. And then again, it's the environment. That environment plays a huge piece. That's the E at the end of scope, where it's like, if the environment doesn't match, there could be so much stress and strain. We make sure that those environments are safe, accessible, and functional for everyone, not just the individual, but the caregiver. And so we come in with that wide lens to be able to put a wide scope of support in place for the individual and their caregiver. Because it takes a village. It definitely takes a team.
Takes a team.
Well, and I think too, I'm just going to use the example of a daughter who wants to do everything and be present for her mom. And we have to, deconstruct that and say, what do you really find meaningful? Because many times they say, well, I hardly have time to have a meaningful interaction with her because I'm doing laundry and I'm getting her pills and I'm doing all those things. And I said, well, those are the things that we can put systems in place and have somebody else pick up the pills or have them delivered so that we can eliminate the things that really aren't meaningful and focus on what do you want to do and how you want to spend that time with your mother.
We often hear, I wish I could just be a daughter sometimes with my mom and not just the caregiver. I'm always griping at her, take your meds, do this, we got to shower. And sometimes I just want to go over and watch a movie or paint her fingernails and be her daughter. And so, like Michelle said, we find out what's meaningful and valuable to both parties, not just the individual, but the caregiver has priorities too. And so we help fill in those gaps.
So is it bad to you say putting these systems in place and I immediately go, oh gosh, could I afford that? Is this like something that is limited in terms of like the systems that can support people, or are there other ways to get support that can help everyone?
There are ways. I mean, there are community resources out there that a lot of people are just not realizing. And so, that is a main focus, is just trying to figure out what people are eligible for. But many times it's just looking at your routines and looking at things in a different way. Because we just get stuck and have kind of tunnel vision. Like, we've always done it this way. And my mom's always gone to the doctor on a Wednesday. Well, if it's easier for you to take off work on a Friday and there's, and that works better for your work system, then let's move all of her appointments to a Friday.
So
And
systems don't necessarily mean bringing other people in. It means creating your own systems. Okay. Uh-huh.
Yes.
Oh,
It's
well,
that-
I won't think we can talk forever. It's a good thing we have next week to talk to. So do you have any final thoughts, I guess, this week about, your plans and your advanced directives before we get into some different topics next week? Any final thoughts you want to share about it?
I mean, I think if there's anything specific that anybody wants to hear more about, is there a way for them to drop some comments, or we can expand
You
upon
could,
it?
comment on the live stream on Instagram, on YouTube or Facebook, comment on
Okay.
any of those places, and you can, say, I want to hear more about this.
Yeah. And we plan on being there every week at the live stream at the listening club too. So you can ask more things there too.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for being here today. I'm going to put the little tickers back up so that if anybody wants to get in contact with either of you, they can go to solaceandsage.org. It also has the Kicking the Bucket website up there. Again, the live streams drop I get it all wrong. So the episodes drop every Wednesday. The live streams happen every Thursday. So again, continue the conversation on our socials. Thank you all for being here and watching this. You can catch the replay online. I'm going to say goodbye now, and goodbye to Michelle and Melissa. Do you want to say goodbye as well?
Hey,
Hi, everyone.
bye everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks.
See you next week. Come back. Okay. Thank you.